What's up, guys? It's James Baney here with Kyle Larson, and we are getting ready to do a spoiler-filled book discussion on Myths and Fables. Stick around. All right, what's up, Kyle? How's it been?
It's been really good, James. It's been a great week of reading here in Portland, Oregon, with two fine Star Wars books to greet me. So I'm happy to be here to talk about those tonight.
It feels weird that we're just getting this thing started. Like, we just did the Thrawn Treason review, and almost immediately it's like, boom, boom, back to back, two books, like, right away.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Myths and Fables was coming out the same day as Crash of Fate, but that's a happy accident, as Bob Ross likes to say. So I'm here for it.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. We're getting ready to do our discussion today on Myths and Fables. Myths and Fables was released, like we said, August 6th in 2019. It was written by George Mann. The audiobook was read by George Monroe Englehart, who actually is funny, was the genie, is famously known for being the genie on Broadway. This book was published by Disney Lucasfilm Press. Random House Audio did the audiobook, and it basically, for the timeline, basically takes place kind of all over the scope, right?
Yes.
What's funny about this book, there's stories that might even seem like they're taking place in like the current canon that we're aware of, like the timeline that we're aware of, but sometimes it just feels like, I don't know, this could have been like 1,000 years before that.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Let's get into our initial thoughts and score. What did you think of this book, and what did you give it as a score?
One thing I like to mention is that the art in the book is by Grant Griffin, and it's incredible. It is some of the best Star Wars art I've ever seen, and I gave this book a 9 out of 10 score because it really is just kind of the purest form of Star Wars storytelling I could think of, because this is for everybody. It's not, you don't really have to worry about if it's canon or if it's legends. It's myths and fables, and these are the stories that I imagine the characters telling each other. And you have stories that, involve Darth Vader, they involve the Jedi, they involve Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is a huge boon for me. And it just kind of jumped, like you said, it jumps all over the place, but it's not in a jarring way. It's in a very, kind of mild, natural way. You feel like you're kind of getting a survey of the galaxy through the mythology of the people that live in the galaxy, just as we talked about last week with Thrawn, who kind of, he evaluates people by their art form and their mythology as well. And I thought that this was such a cool book, and I was over the moon to get a chance to read it and write about it.
Yeah, it's funny. I totally agree with that. I do totally agree. The only thing, or I was going to say, it reminded me a lot of the Aftermath interludes. Like, kind of when you're reading the book, it's like all of a sudden out of nowhere, they just take you to like some random place with people you're unfamiliar with, and they just kind of like tell you what's going on kind of at this current state in the galaxy. What I will say, though, is that I didn't give it anywhere near as high of a score as you did for the reasons that you did like it and gave it a high score, with the reasons that I kept it back, which I'm a point person, by the way. I'm like, I have a hard time with even scores. So I gave it a 5.5, like somewhere kind of in that middle point. And I don't really think that's, it's not that it's a bad book, because if I was really, if I was rating the book for what it is, it's very well written. It's very easy to follow. I enjoyed the stories, but I just have a big hang up on when I don't know if it's true or not. That's the thing that just kind of doesn't stick with me very well. And I don't mean a 5.5 to be like a bad score. It to me personally, it doesn't do a whole lot. So I'm like, nah, whatever. Like, I could take it or leave it. And that would be like the even 5 for me, take it or leave it. But I did actually surprisingly really enjoy the stories, whereas Legends of Luke Skywalker was similar, but I didn't enjoy the stories really.
Mm-hmm.
I had a harder time with that. Speaking of the stories, there's a bunch of them. There's The Knight and the Dragon, The Droid with a Heart, Vengeful Waves, The Wanderer, The Black Spire, Gaze of Stone, The Witch and the Wookiee, The Dark Wraith, and Chasing Ghosts. Did you I don't know, when it comes to like where is all of this going, right? Did you have any sort of feelings towards these stories meaning anything within the canon, or what's the point of this book in your opinion? Why read it?
Well, I thought the point of the book was kind of how I said before. It's to kind of give us some introspection to the way that people are navigating their way through this galaxy that seems like, since we've been involved in it as observers and as watchers, has just been in constant turmoil. You know, we came into it in the prequel trilogy where things kind of seemed good on the surface, but they weren't. You know, as soon as you get into the Senate and then eventually the Sith taking over, that, you know, this galaxy looked good at the surface, but there was always trouble underneath. And the mythology that people created around, whether it be the Jedi, whether it be the Sith, whether it just be stories that they told one another, was to kind of rationalize this craziness around them, this madness of war. And I thought that, like the story of the Wanderer and eventually the Wraith, where I almost, I didn't write this in my review, but I was torn whether that was supposed to be metaphorical or allegorical, or if it was just, a straightforward tale about a Jedi and then about a Sith that came when the Jedi was gone. So, I really, really like that, the fact that that George Mann kind of captured the psyche of people that just want to get through the day in the Star Wars universe. And these are the stories they kind of tell one another to get through the day. And, but I do agree with what you're saying though. It is hard to know like what is fact and what is fiction, but the Obi-Wan story is fact for me. So I'm just going to put that on the record right now.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Obi-Wan story being The Knight and the Dragon, I assume?
The Knight and the Dragon. Yeah.
So that one to me, I'm hearing a lot of people saying, okay, so this is kind of another Obi-Wan adventure about him being in the desert, which I'm famously kind of against the whole like Obi-Wan television show, against the Obi-Wan movie. I'm not a fan of that. So that one particularly didn't speak to me. There were a couple in there, but the thing about The Knight and the Dragon was that was one of the stories that is supposed to be about someone that you know. There's The Droid with the Heart too, which is also clearly supposed to be about General Grievous, right? Although I did wish they maybe would have covered other characters that have done that. Count Vidian from the the Jedi one. I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head. Not Heir to the Jedi, New Dawn.
No, New Dawn. Yeah.
I was hoping that was actually going to be that character, and then I was like, but it's probably just going to be General Grievous, and it in fact was General Grievous, or at least it seemed like that really was the way they were telling that story. There's a couple other, I guess, I didn't know this, but in subsequent like kind of poking around, I guess the Witch and the Wookiee also have maybe some characters that have appeared in some of the video games and stuff. And I was like, oh, so I guess that's kind of supposed to be about somebody as well. The ones that really got to me personally was the Wanderer and the Dark Wraith. I was like, I think the Dark Wraith is supposed to be Darth Vader.
Yeah. That's what I took it as well.
You took it as that as well? Okay, so I was like...
There was actually an interview with George Mann, and I think he said that point blank, it was supposed to be Darth Vader.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So then it made me wonder if, no pun intended, if the Wanderer is supposed to be Obi-Wan as well. And I was like, okay, so I don't know. Do you think that the Wanderer happened long before Darth Vader was ever a thing? And then they're like, maybe he'll return. I kind of had this impression that it was like the Wanderer showed up in a normal lifespan, like maybe a couple years in between he would show up. But when the Wraith showed up, it still would have seemed reasonable. Like it hadn't been like 100 years or 1,000 years since the Wanderer had shown up. It felt like it was like just a couple years ago was the last time we saw him. And maybe he would come to save us from the Wraith, but he didn't. And I was like, who could that have been? I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was more of a title than a specific Jedi. But if I had to think of it as like, if I had to pick a Jedi just because of the green saber, I was like, oh, is that Qui-Gon? Immediately
well,
I
that's
thought...
true. They did say green saber, yeah.
Yeah, and well, in the artwork too, there's like a, it's not... The person definitely doesn't look like Qui-Gon, but I had to kind of think about it. But the more I thought was... maybe this has kind of been an honorary thing for the Jedi. Maybe there are these planets that they just kind of show up at and they protect, people that they know are going to thrive eventually, and they kind of protect them from natural disasters and kind of, things like that. And, not just one specific Jedi, just kind of, it's just kind of a like an honorary title that they have.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, okay, so let's say, Darth Vader is around and he's kicking butt in his like 20-year reign, right? I guess theoretically it could have been like the Wanderer saved us during the Clone War era, and then the Wanderer saved us again in the Clone War era a couple years later. Or, it's like all kind of in that time frame. And then when the Wraith shows up, the Wanderer doesn't show up anymore because he was hunted down and killed. Kind of an idea. There are no more of this person. Yeah, that's interesting.
Definitely. And well, I thought it was interesting too is they kind of hint at the Wraith taking children, and we know that the Jedi took children who were Force sensitive, and we also know that Vader and the Inquisitors were on the hunt for children that were, Force sensitive. So there's this really, really dark kind of subcontext to this whole story of like, they've seen children go missing, and, and these parents are telling their kids these stories as to be like, oh, well, if you don't, eat your vegetables, Darth Vader is going to come and snatch you up in the night. And I thought that was
interesting you say that too, because one of the stories is specifically about them saying, don't go into the woods, don't go into that field. Yeah. And sure enough, they go into the field and the kids get kidnapped. And the one little girl, this is in a different story, the Black Spire, which is one of the fewer stories that actually spoke to me. And I don't know why it did particularly. It might have just been like, for whatever reason, when I was listening to it, I was just like locked in. And so I was paying attention to every detail. But it felt... I don't know. It felt actually a lot of the stories felt very biblical the way they're written. Very, I guess you could say, fable. This and Fables. That's kind of the point. But they were like, for whoever shall, blank, blank, blank. Just the way it was written was kind of like that. And this one to me did seem, I don't know, like it really locked me in. It wasn't my absolute favorite. Which ones would you say that you were like near or top your favorite? Which ones spoke to you and which ones didn't?
Well, I loved Knight and Dragon, Droid with a Heart, excuse me. And Gaze of Stone, I thought, was the one about the Sith on Moribond, Sith statue. I thought that one really affected me. That was the one where I was like, wow, that was that was really, really heavy. About,
you know what's funny? That's my number one pick was Gaze of Stone.
Yeah, Gaze of Stone was just, that really just devastated me because, we meet this child who's got problems, like every child does. He's maybe showing signs of aggression. And then the Sith comes in and just manipulates the mother and the father and is like, I can fix this child, but then just throws him into this terrible, terrible fate of being,
7 years, I think they said.
Yeah, where he's like a prize fighter, like a slave fighter for a while, and then after he's survived that, then he's like, well, now your real training starts, and we all kind of know where that is going, where it's the self-fulfilling destiny or prophecy of all Sith apprentices, where they either overthrow their master or die trying, and it just it's tragedy from page one, and it really affected me, but it's beautifully written as well.
Yeah, I was sitting there the whole time, like I that was one of the stories. I think that maybe is one of my things here. If I could vividly picture what was going on, I felt connected to those characters, and I think Gaze of Stone specifically, I was like, they were painting a picture of like, oh, how perfect of a mural it was going to be, and then they stood on the top and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, man, I'm really connecting with this. It's funny though, that listening to the audiobook, I very rarely saw any of the artwork. So I'm like, oh yeah, there is a picture of this guy. Why am I thinking that there's a potential he could have been Obi-Wan? Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. The artwork wasn't really part of the story for me, even though every time I did see it, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Very Magic the Gathering,
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to mention Grant Griffin, who did the artwork for this, was that there's only one mural per chapter, and you're greeted. It's very similar to the way Legends of Luke Skywalker is presented, is there's only one mural, and it's so effective. It kind of sets the tone for each chapter. And that one is, it's just a lone Twi'lek statue kind of standing there in this, it looks like kind of a storm of dust or something like that. And that was kind of the way I went into reading the chapter or reading the story, and it definitely affected me for sure. It was a good one.
It's funny you said you spoke, Knight and the Dragon spoke to you, Droid with the Heart spoke to you. I actually wrote those as ones that like I was kind of like, okay, whatever, Like I said before, I'm not like, it's not that I'm not the biggest Obi-Wan fan, but I'm not a big fan of like how people, treat him when we want to hear the stories of him in the desert. The Droid with the Heart though, again, that goes back to that same thing where I was like, I was really hoping that this would have been somebody other than General Grievous, and it wasn't. So I think that kind of like let me down. Although I don't mind the story. I think the story is kind of cool. It's interesting how they've really kind of leaned in on the whole, like, it's not a robot. I think the more and more they go into this, they're like, oh, L3 is more than just a robot, the Millennium Falcon is more than just a ship. It's not a mechanical thing. It like has a personality and stuff. And they really lean into that. Me and John have talked ad nauseum about how he doesn't like how they're even like kind of treating the lightsabers now as like their own character. Like, oh, now it calls to you, like what, the lightsaber's talking now. The Star Wars universe has really leaned on the the life or the awareness of droids more and more recently, since Disney bought it. I feel, but I don't know if that was a Legends thing or not.
I don't remember it being a Legends thing, honestly. And I honestly, that's one of the biggest things I really enjoy about the new stories or the new canon, is that they're giving droids an autonomy and an agency and kind of making them these, their own beings. And I noticed that right away in that first comic issue of C-3PO, where it tells the story of how he got the red arm. And I thought that was just such a touching, wonderful story that he chose to wear that red arm as kind of a tribute to this other droid who had sacrificed itself so that they could survive. And that was what I really enjoyed about the General Grievous story. I mean, I thought it was interesting that George Mann definitely made Tin Man, Wizard of Oz references to like, chopping off his limbs to better himself. And in the most opposite way of what the Tin Man was doing, where the Tin Man was just trying to replace his limbs, and Grievous was trying to, make himself a more advanced being. but I thought it was really touching that, you know, the battle droids, we always just see them as these like kind of, you know, mindless drones that are getting chopped up with lightsabers, but to find out they had this whole like neural network where they told this mythology of this droid that tried to save them, I mean, I know it's super cheesy, but I thought it was really cool. I was like, there's this whole other culture in Star Wars that we don't know. And that's kind of the same thing I thought about what struck me the most about the Obi-Wan story too, about the Dragon and the Knight.
Yeah. How he kind of changed the way that the Sand People act.
Yeah, well, he also, well, it's like he kind of brought them into balance because, you know, the first part of the story is talking about how they were, you know, they were beholden to the desert. They loved the fact that they had found this land that they were completely in balance with, and this dragon just disrupted that, you know, totally, and was, you know, starting to eat their banthas and then starting to eat their children, and they were just desperate to find a way to do that, and, you know, they had to turn to murderous ways and really unsavory ways to do that. And then Obi-Wan, he saw that disruption. He came in and, you know, he didn't kill the dragon. He didn't kill the Sand People. He freed the prisoners. He, you know, kind of had this force mind meld, excuse me for going into Star Trek, but had this kind of like force mind meld with the dragons, and then told the Sand People like, okay, cool. You know, the dragon's cool with you. I'm cool with you. Just keep this balance and it'll be good. And I thought it was interesting because, you know, we often look at the Sand People or the Tusken Raiders as this really antagonistic culture, and that they're out to just kind of scavenge whatever they can, when really they're just trying to survive.
Savages.
Yeah, exactly.
Animals. Like, so I slaughtered them like animals.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's a, you know, we see how negative a connotation is when Anakin says that. You know, we see that that's the dark side. That's the bad way of looking at this culture. And so I thought that was really, really cool that George Mann could pull that off in a story and kind of and tell that as well. You know, because in A New Hope we're just used to kind of being afraid of them, and it's effective as well too, because they are, you know, pretty frightening in the first part of that film.
For sure. And there's been some other subsequent stories too. There's the one with like where Darth Vader shows up and they like praise him and worship him as like the evil god and stuff. Yeah. Totally. That's not in this book, obviously. So if you're freaking out for a second, you're like, where was that?
Yeah.
No, that's a comic that shows up, but it's just another story about the Sand People that happened. Two more that we haven't really touched much on that I want to kind of cover. There's one other one that I want to mention too, but before that, The Witch and the Wookiee and Chasing Ghosts both really are probably like my bottom of the barrel. To me, The Witch and the Wookiee, you know, you got these pirates and they show up and then, I don't know, they like are gone at the end, and I'm like, okay, cool, so nothing really happened. And then Chasing Ghosts too kind of had a similar flavor where it's like, oh, let me tell you about a story about a really crazy person in this galaxy, and then it's like, oh, she's a dream, like I made her up, like, so I don't know, it kind of was like it resulted in this like, well, then why did I even listen to that story? I'd almost want to have had that story end with a little more of a and she's still out there, but nobody's ever caught her. Like almost like a murder, a mass murder or something, a serial killer they never caught him, you know?
Yeah, like urban legends.
Something where you're like, he's still out there, they never caught him, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like this bounty hunter is still out there, but it was just like, but we know, wink, wink, they're telling you it's not a real person, it's not a real story. So I guess it's kind of interesting it's a little bit of that whole like, hey, don't pay too close attention to what we consider canon, because all of this stuff is stories from a certain point of view. So maybe that's where the heart is coming from on that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. Absolutely. I thought that that was the thing that bothered me the most about the ghost story, was that at the end he's like, and I totally made it up, because I thought it would really be effective to have you know, to end this, you know, this book that's Myths and Fables with kind of an urban mythology, you know, or a, you know, like the creepypasta or, you know, Slender Man type of thing. I thought that would be really interesting. Like if the Star Wars galaxy had their own kind of like boogeyman or, you know, mythical creature that's out there that might be out there somewhere that everybody's kind of subtly afraid of.
If I could have rearranged these, I would have stuck the Wanderer as the first and the Dark Wraith as the last.
I absolutely agree with that.
You would have started the book with a good kickoff and you'd have been like, oh, I think I get what this book is all about. You read through all the stories, some are hit, some are miss, but then the Dark Wraith coming back and being in the same world as the first story you started with, it will give you that like bookend closure kind of thing and like make you feel like I just went on this whole big journey and there was a point. Like I started the book and I ended the book with a point. And Chasing Ghosts being the last story is like such a downer.
Yeah. Well, because they're literally bookended, those stories. Like they should have, I agree. That's the only flaw of the book that I felt was that the stories weren't really organized in any sort of sense. It seemed like they just kind of plopped them all down there. I understand maybe opening with an Obi-Wan story because everybody's going to be like, oh, that's Obi-Wan. Because I remember I read it and I went onto Twitter and was like, oh, you have no idea Obi-Wan Kenobi fans or something like that. And everybody started freaking out. And, you know, I understand that why they did that, but at the same time, I feel like it could have been laid out in a more logical sense. Yeah.
Last one real quick, just to knock it out. Vengeful Waves. I actually really liked that one.
Yes, I did too.
Even though it did kind of give this whole, I don't know, like a society like raised themselves up and got too greedy and crashed themselves down. And it felt like a story we'd heard 1,000 times. For some reason, I think why it was speaking to me is just like, I don't know, we just got Aquaman. And so I'm like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. There was actually kind of something about like the Atlantis-y, Myths and Fables. So I'm picturing like big stone things with like moss on it, you know, and like, I don't know, something about the imagery of it and like them building giant walls to block the sea and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, all this stuff just seems really cool because James Wan just made it really cool in Aquaman.
Yes.
So I don't know, that one kind of spoke to me too. But anything else you got? I mean, what favorite part? We talked a little bit about our favorite stories. Did you have one specifically?
I would say again, like I really like the Crashing Waves story as well, and I thought that it really reflected the symbiosis that we know is so important in the Star Wars universe between cultures like that. But you know, I would say my favorite one was Obi-Wan and kind of his talk at the end to everyone, and just saying like, look, I have done this for you. I have, you know, please just try to go in peace and go back to living in balance with the planet that we're on. And again, it just exemplified the ultimate like pacifist that I think the Jedi are, and that they eventually grow to be, you know, unless they have to fight. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing that Obi-Wan, he chose not to fight, even though he could have, you know, slayed the dragon as knights do in typical tropes in fiction. And he chose peace. So that really touched me.
Yeah. I talked a little bit earlier about how I think Gaze of Stone was my favorite of all of them. My favorite thing, though, about this whole book, which is funny because I say it I gave it a bad score because it did this, but at the same time, my favorite thing about it was that it just kind of stepped away from everything and was able to just kind of tell a story. And it did kind of in a lot of the stories take you on a sense of like, I don't know, it like in a weird way, like it totally 100% didn't feel like Star Wars and also was totally 100% Star Wars. And I think that was kind of interesting because sometimes when you read these books, you're like, okay, I get it. Droid Federation, Trade Federation, droids, blah, 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 and stuff. So they totally like pulled you away from that in a good way. But then at the same time, like I said, I still sometimes get a little like, well, what's the point, but it is fun. It's a refreshing read. It's cool to check out, and it's cool to use your imagination. Like I said, I gave it a kind of a lower score, but I mean the book to compare it to, if you did read Legends of Luke Skywalker, that's the big one for me. I don't know if it's the same for you, but I ended up sticking this on my giant list of all the books at a 5.5, right between Canto Bight and Ahsoka. That's where it fits in for me.
Okay, that's a good one. I couldn't really think of any other book to compare it to other than, well, I would tie it to A Certain Point of View and Legends of Luke Skywalker because, or From a Certain Point of View, excuse me.
Yeah.
I thought because both of those are collections of stories, and also I got that there was a bit of ambiguity from A Certain Point of View about whether all of those stories were canon or not.
Yes.
And that was one of the joys of reading it, was like, okay, well, maybe this happened, but hopefully it happened. So
that's so funny that you like that. That's the thing that stressed me out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for like a little bit of the mystery still, like them kind of keeping it close to the chest. That's why I don't go on Reddit ever, things like that, because I don't want to know anything until I sit in that theater in December. So.
All right, well, cool. Yeah. I think that basically wraps up everything that we can really talk about in this book. For you guys, we want you to put in the comments, put your favorite moments, put your thoughts on the book, give us your score, anything like that.
Yes, please.
Also, too, corrections. I'm always open to hear like, hey, what the heck? Why didn't you guys see this or notice this or whatever? If you notice Easter eggs, anything like that, tidbits, little things, or if we just totally mess something up, like I don't know why you guys kept saying this word when you were clearly trying to say this other thing. I'm always open to hear that stuff. So yeah, let us know what you thought of Myths and Fables. We gave our scores. Now we want to hear yours, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.